Hello there, and a very warm welcome. I'm George, and it's a real pleasure to have you tuning in with me today. Over many years, I've had this wonderful opportunity to guide so many people just like you through the ins and outs of the IELTS exam. And if there's one part that always seems to get hearts fluttering, a mix of excitement, and let's be honest, a few nerves, it's the speaking test. I want you to think of me not just as some expert lecturing from afar, but as a companion on this journey, someone who's walked this path countless times and can point out the best views and the smoothest trails to get you where you want to go. So today we're going to dive deep, really deep into the IELTS General Training Speaking Test. My mission? To pull back the curtain, clear up any fog of confusion, and arm you with the kind of insights and strategies that don't just prepare you, but actually make you feel empowered. Imagine you're about to sit down for a good chat, a chance to share your thoughts, your stories, your unique way of seeing the world. That, my friends, is the heart and soul of the speaking test. It's not an interrogation, it's not a test of some obscure hidden knowledge. It's your moment to show how well you can communicate in English. So grab a metaphorical cup of tea, settle in, and let's explore this together, step by step. By the time we're done, I'm confident you'll feel ready to not just face it, but to truly shine. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of what happens in each part of the test, it's absolutely vital to understand what the examiner is actually listening for. This isn't about them trying to catch you out. It's about getting a clear picture of your communication skills. And they do this by looking at 4 key areas. Knowing these will be like having a compass for your preparation. It helps you understand why certain advice is given and where to focus your energy. First up, we have fluency and coherence. This counts for a good 25% of your mark. Now, fluency, that's all about how smoothly and naturally you speak. Can you keep a good rhythm going without too many awkward pauses or stumbles, or going back and correcting yourself all the time? It's not about talking at lightning speed. A natural, comfortable pace is what you're aiming for. Think of it as the melody of your speech. Then there's coherence. This is about how well your ideas hang together. Do your thoughts flow logically? Are they easy for someone to follow? This is where using those lovely linking words and phrases comes in. Words like however, therefore, so. As a result, another point is, they act like signposts, guiding your listener through your ideas. It's about making sure your conversation builds a clear picture, like a well-constructed bridge between your thoughts. Next on the list, also weighing in at 25%, is lexical resource, or in simpler terms, your vocabulary. The examiner wants to see the range of words you can use and how accurately you use them. Can you find the right words for the topic? Can you express yourself precisely? It's not about trying to impress with really long, complicated words you're not comfortable with. It's more about showing you have a good toolkit of everyday words and some more specific vocabulary related to what you're discussing. And if you can use idiomatic language, those natural phrases native speakers use correctly and naturally, that's a real bonus. If you can't think of a specific word, don't panic. Being able to paraphrase to explain what you mean using other words is also a great skill to show. Our third pillar, again 25%, is grammatical range and accuracy. This looks at your ability to use different grammatical structures correctly. Can you build complex sentences as well as simple ones? Are you getting your tenses right? Do your subjects and verbs agree? Now look, minor mistakes are okay. Even native speakers slip up sometimes. But if grammatical errors keep cropping up and make it hard to understand you, that will affect your score. The goal here is to show that you're flexible with grammar and have good control over it. Think of grammar as the scaffolding of your language. The stronger and more varied that scaffolding, the more detailed and nuanced the building you can create. And finally, the fourth criterion, making up the last 25%, is pronunciation. This is all about how clear and easy to understand your speech is. And let me be really clear here. This is not about having a specific accent, like trying to sound British or American. Your own accent is absolutely fine as long as the way you pronounce individual sounds, your stress patterns on words and in sentences, and your intonation, that's the rise and fall of your voice. Don't make it difficult for the examiner to understand what you're saying. Speaking clearly, putting emphasis on the right parts of words and sentences, and using a natural melody in your R's all contribute to good pronunciation. The main aim is that you're easily understood from start to finish. So those are the four big ones, each equally important. A good, balanced performance across all of them is really what you should be aiming for. Knowing this framework, let's now walk into the test itself, part by part. All right, so let's talk about part one, the overture, your introduction and interview. This usually lasts about 4 to 5 minutes, and it's really designed to ease you into the whole experience. Think of it as the warm-up, a chance for you to get comfortable and for the examiner to get a first sense of your English in a fairly relaxed chat. So, what actually happens? Well, the examiner will start by introducing themselves and checking your ID. Pretty standard stuff. Then they'll begin asking you a series of questions on familiar, everyday topics. These are things you know about, things from your daily life. We're talking about subjects like your home, where you live, what your place is like, maybe your favorite room, or it could be about your hometown, what it's like, what you enjoy or don't enjoy about it, perhaps how it's changed over the years. They might ask about your work or your studies, what you do for a living or what subject you're studying, why you chose that path, what a typical day looks like for you. Questions about your family and friends, how you spend time together, are also common. And of course, hobbies and interests, what you love doing in your free time, why those activities appeal to you, how often you get to do them. Even things like your daily routines, your favorite foods, the weather, how you get around, music, books, technology. It's all fair game for part one. The main purpose here is to get you talking, to see how you handle basic communication about yourself and your life. It helps the examiner get a feel for your general fluency, your everyday vocabulary, and your basic grammar. Now I've got a few golden nuggets of advice for making the most of part one. First off, and this might sound obvious, but really try to be natural and friendly. A smile, good eye contact, these things go a long way in creating a positive atmosphere. It helps you relax, and it makes for a more pleasant conversation. A really crucial tip is to extend your answers. Please avoid just giving one word or very short replies. A simple yes or no just isn't enough. The examiner wants to hear you speak English. So aim to give a reason for your answer, or perhaps an example, or just a little bit of extra detail. For instance, if the examiner asks, "Do you like reading?" don't just say, "Yes." Expand on it. You could say, "Yes, I absolutely love reading. I find it's a fantastic way to unwind and also to learn new things. I'm particularly keen on historical novels at the moment." See? That gives them so much more to work with. However, while you want to extend, don't overextend in part one. You don't need to give a long speech for every single question here. Generally, 2 to 3 well-developed sentences are perfect. The examiner has a list of questions to get through in this section, so keeping a good pace is also important. And of course, listen carefully to the question. It sounds simple, but nerves can sometimes make us jump the gun. Make sure you understand what's being asked before you launch into your answer. If you mishear or misunderstand, your answer might not be relevant, and it's perfectly okay to politely ask for clarification if you need it. Something like, "Could you please repeat the question?" or "I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that," is absolutely fine. Even though the topics are quite simple, try to use a range of language. This is your first chance to show what you can do. If you're talking about your hobbies, use some interesting verbs and descriptive adjectives. If you're discussing your work, make sure your tenses are appropriate. What about honesty? Well, honesty is generally the best policy, with a little twist. If you genuinely don't like something or don't do something the examiner asks about, it's fine to say so. You don't have to invent a passion for stamp collecting if you don't have one. However, always try to explain why. For example, if you're not a sports fan, you could say, "To be honest, I'm not particularly keen on playing sports myself. I've always been more drawn to activities like reading or painting, but I do enjoy watching major sporting events on TV like the World Cup, for example." And finally, it really helps to practice talking about these common topics. Now, I'm not saying you should memorize answers. Absolutely not. But being familiar with how you might talk about your job, your hobbies, your hometown, and so on in English will make you feel much more confident and help you access the right vocabulary more quickly when you're in the test. Part one really does set the tone. If you can deliver a confident, articulate performance here, it can give you a real boost for the rest of the test. Think of it as laying down a really solid, positive foundation. Okay, moving on to part 2, the spotlight moment. Your individual long turn. This section usually takes about 3 to 4 minutes in total, and that includes 1 minute for you to prepare. This is where you really get to take center stage. Part 2, often called the long turn or the cue card section, is all about testing your ability to speak at length on a particular topic, to organize your thoughts coherently, and to use language effectively. So, here's how it unfolds. The examiner will hand you a task card, or a cue card as it's often known. This card will have a topic on it, along with some specific points that you should try to cover in your talk. You'll also be given a pencil and some paper so you can make notes. You get 1 full minute to prepare what you're going to say and to jot down those notes. Then you'll need to speak about the topic for 1 to 2 minutes. The examiner will let you know when to stop. After you've finished your talk, the examiner might ask 1 or 2 very brief follow-up questions directly related to what you just said. Let me give you an example of what a cue card topic might look like. It could be something like, describe a memorable journey you have taken. And then it would say, you should say where you went, who you were with, what you did on the journey, and explain why this journey was memorable for you. The main purpose of part 2 is to see if you can speak continuously and fluently for a decent stretch of time. They're also looking at how well you can organize your ideas and whether you can use appropriate vocabulary and grammar to discuss that specific topic. And of course, they'll be checking if you've covered the main points on the cue card. Now, how can you really nail this part 2? I've got a bit of a master plan for you. First and foremost, maximize that 1 minute of preparation time. It's absolute gold. Don't even think about trying to write out full sentences. There simply isn't time, and it'll make you sound robotic. Instead, focus on jotting down keywords and short phrases for each of the bullet points on the card. Think about a simple structure for your talk. Maybe a quick introduction, then address each of the points on the card in order, and then have a nice concluding thought or feeling, especially for that explain why part, which is often about your personal connection to the topic. While you're at it, quickly brainstorm some good vocabulary. For that memorable journey example, you might jot down words like breathtaking scenery, unforgettable experience, eye-opening, formed a strong bond, adventurous spirit. Don't panic if your mind goes blank for a second. Just get some core ideas down. Remember, your notes are just prompts to help you, not a script to be read. It's really important to try and address all the prompts on the cue card. The examiner will be listening to see if you've tackled the whole task. In fact, those bullet points can provide a really natural and logical structure for your talk. My next tip is to try and tell a story. The most engaging and high-scoring part 2 talks often feel like you're sharing a little story. Use descriptive language. Help the examiner picture what you're talking about. Don't just list facts. Describe the sights, the sounds, the smells, and most importantly, your feelings and reaction. This makes your talk so much more personal, more vivid, and more interesting. Think about starting strong and ending well. You could begin with a clear opening phrase like, okay, I'd like to tell you about a journey that was particularly memorable for me, or the memorable journey I'm going to describe is when I went. And for your conclusion, try to summarize why it was so important or how it made you feel, linking back to that final prompt on the card. And here's a big one. Keep talking, aiming for that 2-minute mark. Try your best to speak for the full 2 minutes if you can. If you finish too early, say after only a minute, it might suggest you don't have enough to say or that you can't elaborate on your ideas sufficiently. On the other hand, if you're still speaking when the examiner gently signals you to stop, that's usually a good sign. It means you had plenty to say. But what if you feel like you're running out of things to say mid-flow? It happens. First, quickly glance at your notes. Is there anything you jotted down that you haven't expanded on yet? Could you add more details or examples to a point you've already made? Could you describe your feelings or opinions about the topic in a bit more depth? If you feel you've really covered all the prompts, you could offer a concluding thought or perhaps link your experience to a broader idea. For example, with the journey, you might say, and this journey really taught me the importance of stepping outside my comfort zone and being open to new experiences. Part 2 is also a fantastic opportunity to showcase a wider range of your language skills. This is where you can bring in some more varied vocabulary and try to use more complex sentence structures, perhaps different tenses if you're talking about past experiences and their present relevance, or conditional sentences or relative clauses to add more detail. Remember, natural pauses are perfectly okay. Don't be afraid to pause briefly to gather your thoughts. It's much better than filling every tiny silence with and and ah. A short, thoughtful pause is completely natural in conversation. And finally, those follow-up questions at the very end of part 2. After your talk, the examiner will likely ask one or maybe two very short, direct questions that are related to what you've just been talking about. For example, if you spoke about a memorable journey, they might ask, "Would you like to go on that journey again?" Or, "Do you often travel with those people?" Just answer these concisely and directly. Part 2 is your moment to really shine independently. Think of it as delivering a well-prepared, yet still spontaneous little presentation. The best way to get good at this: practice with lots of different cue card topics, time yourself, and if you're brave enough, record yourself speaking and listen back. It can be incredibly revealing. George, and that brings us to part 3, the deep dive, your two-way discussion. This final part of the test also lasts around 4 to 5 minutes. Now, if part 1 was the gentle warm-up and part 2 was your solo performance, then part 3 is where you get into a more engaging, in-depth discussion with the examiner. This section cleverly extends the topic you talked about in part 2, but it takes it into more abstract, more analytical territory. So, what can you expect? The examiner will ask you a series of questions that are thematically linked to your part 2 topic, but these questions will be more general and will require you to think more abstractly. For example, if your part 2 topic was about that memorable journey, then your part questions might explore things like the pros and cons of different types of travel, the impact of tourism on local cultures or the environment, what future trends we might see in travel, the importance of travel in education or for personal development, or perhaps differences in travel habits between, say, older and younger generations. These questions are designed to get you to discuss issues, to analyze them, to compare and contrast different ideas, to speculate about possibilities, and to give well-reasoned opinions. It really is a genuine two-way conversation, although, of course, the examiner's main role is to ask the questions and prompt you to elaborate and explore your ideas further. The purpose of part 3 is to assess your ability to do several key things: to express and justify your opinions clearly, to analyze and discuss issues in more depth than in part 1, to speculate about the future or about hypothetical situations, and crucially, to use a wider range of vocabulary and more complex grammatical structures to handle these more abstract concepts. It's also looking at how well you can engage in a sustained, coherent discussion. So, how can you best navigate the waters of part 3? I've got a few strategies for you. First, as always, listen very carefully to the questions. The questions in part 3 can be more complex and have a few layers to them. Make absolutely sure you understand what's being asked. And please don't be afraid to ask for clarification if a question isn't crystal clear. It's perfectly fine to say something like, "Could you explain what you mean by," or "I'm not quite sure I understand the question, could you rephrase it?" It's much better to do that than to guess and give an answer that's off topic. This is the part of the test where you really need to develop your answers fully. Short, underdeveloped answers just won't cut it here. You should aim to state your main point clearly, then provide reasons to support your opinion or your argument. Give examples to illustrate what you're saying. Examples make abstract ideas much more concrete and understandable. And if it's appropriate, you could even acknowledge other perspectives, perhaps by saying something like, "On the one hand, some people argue that, but on the other hand, it's also true that." It can be really helpful to structure your responses in part 3. A clear structure makes your answers much easier for the examiner to follow. You can use useful phrases to signpost your ideas, like, "Well, in my opinion," or "I firmly believe that there are several reasons for this." Firstly, for example, or to give you an instance, however, it's also important to consider, looking ahead, I would imagine that part 3 is your prime opportunity to use more sophisticated language. This is where you can really demonstrate the breadth of your vocabulary and your command of more complex grammatical structures. Think about trying to use more abstract nouns like globalization, sustainability, interdependence, innovation, conditional sentences like, if governments were to invest more in public transport, then we might see a reduction in traffic congestion. Modal verbs for speculation, heaps of might, could, may, should, comparative and superlative forms to draw distinctions, and even the passive voice where it's appropriate and sounds natural. What if you're asked a really tricky question? It's okay to take a moment to think. For those more complex questions, it's perfectly acceptable and often advisable to say something like, that's a very interesting question. Let me just think about that for a moment. This shows you're considering the question seriously, rather than just blurting out the first thing that comes into your head. Sometimes the examiner might rephrase a point you've made or perhaps even offer a gentle counterargument. If this happens, be prepared to engage with their ideas thoughtfully. It's part of the dynamic of the discussion. And don't worry if you don't have a really strong, fixed opinion on every single topic. If you genuinely don't have a definitive view, you can always discuss different sides of the issue. You could say something like, well, that's quite a complex issue, isn't it? You could argue that, well, at the same time, other people believe. While you should definitely elaborate on your answers, always make sure you stay on topic. Ensure your answers remain relevant to the specific question the examiner has asked. And finally, try to show your range throughout Part 3. Vary your sentence structures, vary your vocabulary. Avoid falling into the trap of repeating the same phrases or sentence starters over and over again. Part 3 is where you can truly demonstrate your ability to think critically on your feet and to express complex ideas articulately in English. It's a dynamic conversation, so the key is to be flexible, responsive, and engaged. So we've journeyed through all 3 parts of the test, but beyond the specifics of each section, there are some universal keys, some overarching principles and mindsets that can really elevate your performance and, just as importantly, improve your whole experience of the speaking test. The absolute non-negotiable number 1 is practice. Practice and then practice some more. There's just no substitute for it. The more you actively speak English in different situations with different people, more fluent, the more confident, and the more natural you'll become. So what kind of practice? Well, if you can, try to speak with native English speakers or at least with other learners who are proficient. Join conversation groups if they're available. And of course, specifically practice answering typical IELTS questions for all 3 parts of the test. A really powerful technique is to record yourself speaking. I know, it can feel a bit awkward at first to listen to your own voice, but it is incredibly valuable. You'll hear your own hesitations, any pronunciation issues you might have, those little grammatical errors that slip in, and you'll spot areas where your vocabulary could be richer or more varied. It's one of the best ways to self-correct and improve. Next up, and this is crucial, don't try to memorize answers. Examiners are highly trained to spot responses that sound memorized or rehearsed, and they just come across as unnatural. The whole point of the test is to assess your ability to engage in spontaneous, authentic communication. Now, it's absolutely a good idea to prepare ideas, to think about common topics, and to build up your vocabulary around those topics. But when you're in the test, deliver those ideas in your own words in a way that feels natural to the conversation you're having. Here's a simple but effective one. Aim to speak more than the examiner. Remember, this test is all about your English. The examiner is there to guide the conversation, to ask the questions, and to prompt you, but you should be doing the lion's share of the talking. Try to relax and be yourself, as much as you can under exam conditions. Of course. Nerves are completely normal, everyone feels them to some extent. But try to channel that nervous energy in a positive way. A friendly, open demeanor can make the whole interaction more pleasant for both you and the examiner. Think of it as a professional but still friendly conversation. Focus on clarity over speed. It's much better to speak clearly and at a natural, understandable pace than to rush your words. Rushing can often lead to more mistakes, and it can make you harder for the examiner to understand. So concentrate on clear enunciation and a comfortable rhythm. What about mistakes? Well, mistakes happen. Don't let them derail you. Everyone makes mistakes when they're speaking, even in their native language. If you make a small grammatical error and you realize it straight away, It's fine to quickly correct yourself and then just move on. For example, if you said, I did, you could just say, I went, and continue. If you don't notice the mistake at the time, try not to worry about it too much, unless it's a persistent type of error that's really getting in the way of communication. The examiner is looking at your overall communicative ability, not at isolated slips. And as I mentioned earlier, don't ever be afraid to ask for clarification. If you don't understand a word the examiner uses, or if a question seems a bit ambiguous, it's so much better to politely ask them to repeat it or explain it than it is to just guess and risk giving an irrelevant answer. A simple, I'm sorry, could you please rephrase that? Or I'm not familiar with that word, could you explain what it means, is perfectly acceptable. Think about your body language and eye contact too. Try to maintain natural eye contact with the examiner. It shows that you're engaged in the conversation and that you're confident. If you normally use hand gestures when you speak, feel free to do so naturally, but try to avoid nervous fidgeting if you can. And perhaps the most important mindset to carry with you is to focus on communication, not on absolute perfection. The IELTS speaking test is assessing your ability to communicate effectively in English. While accuracy in grammar and vocabulary is certainly important, so is your ability to actually get your message across, to express your ideas clearly, to share your opinions, and to engage in a meaningful conversation. George, and there we have it. We've taken a really comprehensive journey together through the IELTS General Training Speaking Test. We've explored the landscape, we've understood the signposts, and hopefully I've equipped you with some valuable strategies and insights to help you navigate each part with a greater sense of confidence and clarity. Please remember, this test is your stage. It's your unique opportunity to let your English voice be heard, to share your experiences, your thoughts, your personality. The examiners are not sitting there looking for flawless perfection. They're looking for effective, authentic communication. They genuinely want to hear what you have to say. So, as you continue your preparation, certainly focus on building that fluency, on expanding your vocabulary, on refining your grammar, and on making sure your pronunciation is clear and easy to understand. But perhaps most importantly, cultivate that inner sense of confidence in your own ability to express yourself. Believe in the hard work and practice you've put in, trust your instincts when you're in that room, and try to approach the test not as some daunting, fearsome hurdle, but as what it truly is, an engaging conversation. I genuinely believe that with dedicated preparation and the right mindset, every single one of you can achieve a score that truly reflects your abilities and, more importantly, opens up those doors to your future dreams and aspirations. So, take these insights, make them your own, practice them, internalize them, and then step into that examination room ready to connect, to communicate, and to convince. I wish you all the very, very best of luck. You've absolutely got this.